And you may notice, if you know me, you know that I am not Judy Howell. So I'm Dr. Mary Pearson. I'm a family practice physician. I work over at New Creation Healing Center, so I did not have a long commute. And the advantage of speaking someplace where you work is that you know how to use the copier. So that's one of the big advantages. So cognitive behavioral therapy is based on the principles that our thoughts influence our feelings influence our behavior, and our behaviors can either negatively or positively influence our lives. Now, we all kind of understand that intuitively, right? If we are thinking clearly and we have a good plan for the day, that is going to make us feel good. If we get up and we think, oh, it's raining out again, that's going to influence how we feel. So we all understand that intuitively. But cognitive behavioral therapy kind of spells this out in a very practical way. If you have a situation, something happens, it causes a thought. That thought may cause an emotion, and that emotion may influence a behavior. Now, events or situations don't make us feel a certain way. If you're like me, intuitively that makes me feel like, wait a second, I got into a line at Market Basket and I was in a hurry, and that situation made me feel upset. But I have control over my thoughts to some degree, okay? People don't make us feel a certain way. It's how we think about or interpret situations or things that people do or say that influence how we feel. Let me give you an example. I was running a little late this morning, and I found myself thinking, I'm running late because I'm behind someone who is following the speed limit. That's so unreasonable of them. And then I had to think, well, all right, what were my courses of decisions that made me run a little bit late? And then I thought, you know, Father Chris is always on time. He'll let Alice and Kathy in. It'll be okay. So reframing, rethinking about how we approach a situation can influence how we feel. So where in the sequence do we have control? Well, sometimes we have control over situations. Sometimes, for instance, you chose to be here this morning learning about mental health instead of doom scrolling on the internet, or instead of doing something else. So you chose to be in this situation today. And that is going to evoke certain thoughts because you're changing your venue. Sometimes we have control over our thoughts. We don't always have control over our emotions, but when we have control over our thoughts, we can have impact on our emotions. And we often have a choice with our behavior. So let's look at this in another way. Can we control or influence events or situations? Sometimes. But we've all been in situations or had events happen to us that we could not control. We could not control the fact that a drunk driver hit us. We could not control that our children chose not to speak to us. We can't choose our parents, our siblings, or the situations we grew up in. We don't choose natural disasters. We don't choose to be present at the time of an earthquake unless we happen to be on the rescue team. We cannot choose the decisions of others. So sometimes we don't have control over events. Can we choose our thoughts and our feelings? Here's one of the fundamental principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. We only have access to our feelings by our thoughts. What's that mean? Well, if you'll indulge me for a minute, I want you to all close your eyes, and I want you to think of a pink elephant, and I want you to raise your hand when you've got a picture of a pink elephant in your head. Some of you are still working on the pink elephant. Okay, all right. Okay, now put your hands down, and I want you to close your eyes again, and I want you to feel angry. Raise your hand when you've got it. Okay, what did you have to do to feel angry? Did you have to think of something first?
Yeah.
I usually go right to insurance companies. That will usually make me angry right away. Some thoughts come out of the blue. These are called automatic thoughts. And these are not necessarily thoughts we intentionally choose. But many of our thoughts, we may not exactly intentionally choose, but there's something that we thought or something that triggered a thought that brings us down a certain thought pathway. So we can't control what thoughts come, but we can learn to redirect or reframe them. And that's the fundamental principle of cognitive behavioral therapy. That's where we all can use cognitive behavioral therapy. And St. Paul said this, it's not new, it's not a new principle in human behavior. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And St. Paul goes on to say that this is a way that we can change our behavior by changing our thoughts, by having our minds renewed. So cognitive reframing. The first step in cognitive reframing is knowing the difference between thoughts and feelings. And that sounds obvious, but it isn't always intuitively obvious, is it? Sometimes I respond to something logically, and sometimes I respond to something emotionally. Have any of you ever had that experience where your first response may not necessarily be the logical response? Okay. If you look at the Myers-Briggs, which probably my husband will touch on a little bit in the next segment, if you look at the Myers-Briggs, some of us are thinkers, and we tend to use thoughts more. Some of us are feelers, and feelings are more our native term. So we all have a little tendency one way or the other to be more comfortable in the world of intellect or the world of emotion. Emotions are something we feel within the body or within the soul. It might be love, it might be fear, it might be anger, it might be sadness, it might be joy. All these emotions, good and bad, are part of what make us human. As opposed to thoughts, which are something you actually think. So when I'm looking at somebody's labs and I say, oh, their potassium is low, I may feel an emotion about that. Maybe, oh, that's really low, I don't like that. But I have to think about it, and I have to think about why their potassium might be low. If you look at your gas tank and you filled it up yesterday and the gauge is now on 0, you have to think, why is that? That's not good. Do I have a leak in my gas tank? Did my husband take my car and not tell me? What happened? Second step in cognitive behavioral therapy is identifying our distorted thinking or our negative thinking. Now, we can come to a place of having distorted thinking because of our family of origin. Sometimes some families are raised with certain misconceptions. One of the big things that I see in Mediterranean families, Jewish families, is to love, to care, is to worry. The more you worry, the more you care. All right? And we can all feel that way sometimes. But that's not necessarily true, is it? Worrying really doesn't make you any more loving. It does tie you up in knots and sometimes makes you ineffective. Secondly, we need to challenge the thought and examine its validity. So we'll use our example. To worry is to care. Is that really true? Am I really doing my best for my grandson by worrying about him? Or is there something else I can do? maybe I can talk to him. Maybe I can find out what's really bugging him. Maybe I can get him help in some way. Maybe that would be a more loving response than staying at home and worrying about it. Thirdly, the negative thought needs to be replaced with a more balanced and positive interpretation. So, an example is the rainy day today. You could be either one of these pictures. You can be the sad little guy who's saying, oh, it's raining. I'm so sad it's raining. I wanted to go outside. I'm a little robot and I'm going to get rusty. Or you can be that little kid who's like, rain is fun. I've got my new shiny umbrella and I'm going to put on my brightest raincoat and I'm going to dance in the rain. I don't like to go out in the rain generally, so I'm not probably going to put on a shiny new raincoat or carry my bright umbrella, but I might say, this might be a good day to bake bread. I might say, this is a good day. People will be coming to the conference today instead of going out to work in their gardens. So a rainy day is a good day. Cognitive reframing can sometimes be hampered by what we call cognitive distortions. And I'm going to go through what cognitive distortions are and some of the common ones very, very briefly. And this talk is not meant to replace what a good cognitive behavioral therapist can do. But there was a really interesting study, and it said the average person, you or I, can learn the basics of cognitive behavioral therapy, and 40% of all people can significantly improve their mood and emotions with these tools without any professional help. That's what I love to hear, is how can we help ourselves? How can we make things better for ourselves? So cognitive distortions can be learned. They can be something that you were taught. They can be something that you experience. So a lot of times what we find is people who go through a traumatic event, there's a lot of learning that occurs in trauma. It's not always balanced learning. So we have to put it in the bigger context of the rest of our lives. A lot of times people who have cognitive distortions have had a very difficult event or a very difficult trauma, and they need to have help around that specific issue and be able to get help moving forward, because you can get very negative. You know, if you've had some bad medical experiences, you can start to say something like, all doctors are bad. All nurses are mean. They've got sharp implements and they just mean me harm. And that cognitive distortion can lead to you not getting help when you need it. Now, there are bad doctors. There are some mean nurses, but most of them aren't. And so we need to be able to continue to get help from those doctors and nurses when we need it. We can't let that cognitive distortion alter things. Cognitive distortions also can be altered by biochemistry. So if we have a tendency towards depression, that will kind of create a blue shade over our view of life. So a cognitive distortion is when your mind puts a spin on events and puts a subjective interpretation to an automatic thought, many times negative. So someone who sees something in the news and says, that person is taking this action and that person is a politician, so that action must be bad. They must be trying to figure out how to raise our taxes, so they must be trying to figure out a problem, and therefore I'm going to be upset and angry about that. That's a kind of an example, rather than saying, might this benefit me? Might this be a good decision? Perhaps this is a good policy. Not being able to hold it in balance. So here are some of the basic cognitive distortions, and I'm just going to go through these quickly. One cognitive distortion is what we call all or nothing. So black or white, there's no shades of gray. People will often use words like always or never. All politicians are bad. All priests are bad. All doctors are bad. Or hospitals never help people. Politicians never help people. Those kind of extreme words can magnify our stress because they don't allow for the possibility that something in the middle might be true. Overgeneralizations. Now, Father Chris and I are involved with a youth group right now, and we see this is a classic teenager cognitive distortion. And we were all teenagers once, and many of us have teenagers or had teenagers. And so the first time they fall in love and they break up with their first girlfriend or boyfriend, what do they say? I'm never gonna love again. And that lasts for about 15 minutes. But that's a classic overgeneralization. So taking on an isolated event and assuming that all future events will be the same. For example, if you face a rude sales clerk, you may start believing that all clerks are rude and therefore shopping will always be stressful. Catastrophizing is thinking that always the worst thing will happen. Now, Father Chris and I are both Irish, so we kind of believe that anyway, but it's not always true. Sometimes good things happen. Mental filtering. We gloss over the positive event and we hold a magnifying glass to the negative. I'll give you an example. Somebody came to me and they said, my granddaughter baked me a cake. And I think it's because she hates me. I said, really? You know, usually I would think somebody made something for you that's the sign of affection. And she said, no, I think she really knew that I just found out I'm gluten sensitive. And it was really a plot to make me sick. Okay, now that's glossing over a positive event and holding a magnifying glass to the negative. Disqualifying the positive. Similar to the previous, you treat positive events like a fluke, setting a more negative worldview and a low expectations of the future. Yeah, it worked out this time, but probably won't work again next time. Jumping to conclusions. Rather than letting evidence bring you to a logical confusion, one sets one's sights on a conclusion, often negative, and then looks for evidence to back it up. That's a little bit like the thing we just talked about with the woman who's had a birthday cake. So an example of this is a kid who decides everybody hates me in my class, so I know that they're only acting nice to me because they're trying to avoid punishment. So jumping to conclusions is a cognitive distortion. Magnifying or minimizing. So again, placing stronger evidence, more emphasis on negative events and downplaying positive ones. I have an employee who's like this, and she's worked for me for a long time, and I love her to pieces. She's a great employee, but she always feels like every work evaluation is terrible. So I'll give her like 99 praises and say, but there's this one little thing you need to work on. And it's only been the last 5 years we've been able to get through a work evaluation without a box of tissues. But she's a great employee, so I need to and she's learning, she's working on this. So some of us tend to do that. We tend to focus on the one problem and not focus on all the good things. Emotional reasoning. Looking at your emotions as truth. Now, emotions are real, but they're not reality. That's really important to remember. Just because we feel sad doesn't make it a sad situation. There can be reasons why something can be a good situation even if we don't feel in tune with it that day. So one of the common examples of this is when people feel overwhelmed. they get a lot of input at one time, or I don't know about you, but when I get a giant stack of papers from the government, for whatever reason, I automatically feel overwhelmed. But a lot of times, I just need to open the package and find out, oh, this is informational only. I don't actually have to do anything about this. I don't have to fix this. I don't have 47 forms to find. But we can emotionally reason and feel overwhelmed, but we might not actually be overwhelmed. When we feel overwhelmed, we may assume this is a problem we can't solve. But that may not be true. We may be able to get through it and work through it and figure it out. Should statements. This is something I see for a lot of times, and this can keep us from getting well. So very, very rigid rules about how we need to conduct our lives that always need to be followed. Now, I don't mean a moral code here. So we all should have things that we think are right, things that we think are wrong, things that we would never do, and things that we always want to try to do. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a rigidity in all circumstances. And we often see this, for instance, if you've ever, if you have OCD or you know someone who has OCD, where you always have to line up all the papers on your desk just right. And if they're not all lined up just right, people feel very anxious or stressed. That's a lot of extra work every day, if you have to line up all your papers just right. And then if you also have a lot of other rules like that, that can make your life harder. Being flexible, emotionally and mentally, can help us function better. And it can also help others because we don't have to be stressed out. And Sheila said today when she came in, I said, did you sign up? I didn't remember seeing your registration. And she said, oh no, I knew it'd be okay because you're flexible. You can always come in. And I said, and it's advertised. Yes, you can just walk in. So thank you for coming, Sheila. And she said, that's great. But flexibility is an important tool in emotional health. Okay. Labeling and mislabeling. Putting labels that are inaccurate or negative on themselves or others. Somebody who says, I'm so stupid because I forgot this or that. No, you're not stupid. You forgot something once. That's okay. We all do that. Now what do we need to do to fix it? Do you see the difference? Personalizations. People who personalize their stressors tend to blame themselves or others over things that they have no control over, creating stress where it doesn't need to be. So personalization, example of that would be if you're caught in traffic and the person in front of you is going slow, and you say, why is that person slowing down so I can't get to my destination on time? They're doing it on purpose. They probably are. They probably have a kid in the car who's saying, Mommy, can you put that thing on the radio again that I want to hear? It doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's doing it intentionally. So that can create a lot of stress. It can create a lot of stress in interpersonal relationships too, because people can personalize what somebody says. I'm trying to think of the example that's not in my head right now. So if you personalize something, a good example of that might be if your son comes in from Cub Scouts and says, Mom, I hope you don't mind. Tomorrow I have an assignment that I'm supposed to bring in and I forgot about it until tonight. So can you help me make the volcano? So I don't know if any of you were ever making the volcano in your kitchen at the last minute, hoping you have all the things in your kitchen that you need. Some people will take that and personalize it and say, you are always trying to stress me out. You are doing this on purpose. You're just being 11 is what you're being. So personalizing stressors creates a lot of blame. Okay, all right. So, I think we're done with that. All right, so do we choose our thoughts and our feelings? Yes, we do, but I want to talk a little bit about what we can do to change that. So how do we change our distorted thinking? How do we change our thoughts, moods, and emotions? Well, the first thing we need to do is identify our sources of stress. So are there things that we are doing that create stress for us? What are the things that are barriers to us in our mental health? So first thing we want to talk about is in cognitive behavioral therapy, have we identified any of these cognitive distortions? Are any of these cognitive distortions we just talked about something that we're prone to? Secondly, we want to look at how we're feeling, because feelings are often our first way of identifying what's going on. So when we have a feeling, what was the thought that caused the feeling? So if I wake up and I feel happy, why do I feel happy? Am I thinking about something's positive? Am I thinking about the fact that it's spring? Am I thinking about the fact that there's sunshine out there? If I'm sad, why am I sad? What am I thinking about that made me feel sad? We need to be able to identify the problems or the thoughts that led to the emotion. Once we identify the thought, we need to analyze it. We need to say, okay, I'm sad today because it's a rainy day. What can I do about that? Well, what can we do about it? Absolutely nothing. There's nothing you can do. It's going to rain. It's going to be cold today. That's okay. How am I going to adapt to that is the question. How am I going to function in this day that is not what I anticipated? Okay? So how can we take the day and what other things can we do? What's the new approach to it? There's a great author named Jacques Philippe, and he wrote a book about God's help in today's trouble. And one of the things that he says is one of the most important questions we need to ask ourselves when we're in a time of trouble is, what's the approach that God would have for me in this situation? How does God want me to handle this? God always has a plan for us. God always has hope for us. And that's one of the things we need to key into. Secondly, do I need help with this? Is this a thought pattern I am able to change on my own? Very often the case is yes, and that's why a lot of people get improvement with cognitive behavioral therapy, because change is possible. So my example before of, okay, it's going to be a rainy day, but you know what? I've got an inside job. I don't have to work outside. That's all right. I don't have to go outside today. Or maybe I want to invite a friend over. Or maybe I want to bake cookies today. What can I do to change my thought and my pattern? Okay? So first thing is there something I can do about it? Now sometimes there's different circumstances that we face where there is something we can do. And that's also an appropriate thing, because most of us feel better when we have a plan, right? If you have a medical condition or a medical problem, if you have a financial problem, if you know what you're going to do to get out of it, that feels a lot better. That feels a lot safer, even if it means extra work. So identifying the problem, identifying the thought process, and figuring out a plan may be your next step. Identifying, is there a reason why I can't get out of this way of thinking? So what's the cognitive distortion? Do I feel, was I raised to believe that all rainy days are bad days? Was I raised to think that I can't be happy regardless of my circumstances? Is that true? Or is it false? So learning to recognize the cognitive distortions and learning how to reframe it. My husband's going to be speaking in a little bit about something called inner healing, and this can be particularly helpful in areas of trauma or areas where maybe we were raised in a household that was not supportive. So some of us had great parents, some of us had less than great parents, and we may not have been raised to be strong or flexible or adaptable or to like ourselves or to value our gifts or talents. Those are all things that we can still learn how to do in our adulthood. So inner healing can be very helpful with that. Asking others to help us can be a really important tool. Why is this important with cognitive behavioral therapy? Well, Judy, who's the person who set up this slideshow, is a good friend of mine, and so I've asked her to be one of my accountability partners. And does everybody know what an accountability partner is? Okay, so an accountability partner is somebody that likes you, values you, is discreet, is trustworthy, and is wise. And an accountability partner is somebody you say, you know how I keep doing that thing? I need you to tell me when I'm doing that thing. So Judy is one of my accountability partners, and she often has helped me by saying, because I can tend to be an all or nothing person. And so she'll say, you know, you're really upset with your sister right now. Have you tried negotiating? Yeah, it doesn't have to be all my way or the highway. It could be, have you thought about this? Maybe we can find another alternative. So asking other people to help us with our cognitive distortions or our tendencies can be a great way to approach mental health. Social media, we're going to be talking a little bit about social media and social media use. And Suzanne Brown is going to help us with that. She's going to be talking about how to do social media controls. And one of the things that I find, how many people here use social media? Yeah, probably about half of you. So social media for a lot of people can be a wonderful tool in finding resources, in finding support groups. If you have a unique illness or a unique problem, social media can be a wonderful thing as far as a resource to find things. But social media also can lead to something we call doom scrolling. Does everybody know what doom scrolling is? Doom scrolling is when you stay up all night reading your social media posts about how everything is terrible because, depending on your political affiliation, because Trump won or Biden lost, because Elon Musk is making certain changes in the government and how it's going to create havoc, or because certain people are advocating for certain social rights. People can go down these rabbit holes and spend hours and hours and hours looking at negative thoughts and feelings, and that can be very counterproductive to our mental health. So looking at social media health can be a real issue. And then lastly, exercise, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later on. So I wanted to bring to your attention a couple resources that we have here today. First of all, my husband has a couple of books, and one of them is about emotional health and healing, and it's called Free to Be Me. And it talks about how recognizing our temperament, who we are, our strengths, according to the Myers-Briggs. So the Myers-Briggs is a mental health program that talks about our different personality traits. And there's 4 pairs of personality traits that it looks at: introvert versus extrovert, thinker versus feeler, sensate versus intuitive, and judge versus perceiver. And so those are all different ways that we organize information and respond to our environment. And so this book can be very helpful. He also has a book on Christian healing, which has a section on inner healing, which he's going to talk about today. And lastly, another book that he wrote for the post-Easter season called 50 Days of Glory. So that'll be available on the book table. So, any questions so far?